Today on the Braincare Podcast, we have the author of my favorite book that I read last year in 2020, Alex Sujung Kim Pang, who is the author of Rest. Now, before we get into it, I know that he will be able to give a better summary of his own contributions to the world to date than I might do justice. So please, Alex, welcome to the Braincare Podcast, and in your own words, give our listeners a little taste of who you are.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Dan. I am the author of now 3 books about technology, work, and rest. A book mainly about distraction called The Distraction Addiction, and then Rest, which is about the hidden role of rest in the lives of really creative and prolific people. And most recently, a book called Shorter, which is about how companies are putting the insights of rest into practice in the form of things like 4-day work weeks. And I also run a company called Strategy and Rest that works with organizations and individuals who want to put these insights into practice in their own lives and their own companies.
Great, thank you. Now, I guess I want to explore the concept, from a sort of backwards angle, which is a lot of our audience are ultimately high achievers, right? So they're self-starters, they're people who optimize for peak performance, they're entrepreneurs, they're CEOs, they're athletes, they're all those types. I want to discuss what you've learned about how to optimize for peak performance.
Okay. So the people you were describing are both my audience and also a lot of the people who I write about. So in Rest, I talk about Nobel Prize winners and famous authors, CEOs, generals, and the companies I write about in Shorter are Michelin-starred restaurants and software startups and and creative firms. They're not people who are like selling surfboard wax out of their van down by the beach. It's really the same bunch of people. But I think that the big thing that I've learned across these books is that our ideas about the relationship between work and time, in particular, the assumption that long hours and overwork are a necessity for success, they're a key to, high achievement, and turn out to be kind of backwards. That particularly for creative fields, that turns out to be essential to have a balance between deep, focused, intensive time for work and sort of almost equally long periods of what I call deliberate rest, right? Periods where you're doing things, often sort of active, engaging things that take your conscious mind off work, that allow for mental and physical restoration, but which also give your creative subconscious time to turn over ideas, to play around with concepts, and often to have new insights. And this turns out to be valuable, not just for solving whatever problem is immediately before you, but it also encourages people who often are in super competitive fields, people who are working on really big problems, to develop a greater degree of sustainability in their working rhythms and their working lives, so that not only are they able to do better work, but they're also able to do that work for more of their lives. So rather than feeling like you have to kind of sacrifice your health and sort of potentially longevity in order to do really good stuff, learning to work in this way, to balance work and rest, allows you to do both, to do good work, to do good work for a longer part of what often is a pretty long life.
Okay. Now you've mentioned a lot of high level things here, and I guess people might be thinking, okay, sure, you've mentioned there are some people in history that may have employed this. I probably never heard of them. So let's talk about, just to give people the idea of just how high performing people who were obsessed over rest really were. Who are these people? Give us some examples from history.
From history, there are examples like Charles Darwin, Ludwig Beethoven, Winston Churchill. There's a little bit about Barack Obama. Generals like Dwight Eisenhower, most notably. And then a lot of Nobel Prize winners. I was about to say famous mathematicians, but, at least famous among other mathematicians. Ernest Hemingway to Salman Rushdie to Dilbert creator Scott Adams. It's a pretty wide range of fields because it's an historical study, that's where you get really detailed accounts of people's lives, and you can see the kind of long arc of the relationship between work and rest. They do tend to be, they are largely men. About 75% of the people I write about in rest are men. What that reflects are, not that there's a specifically gendered dimension to this, but rather that it's about who had access to this kind of work in these kinds of lives. That's who I'm writing about.
Knows whether they've read your book or not about people finding inspiration from moments of rest would be Thomas Edison, who would set up to have his nap, and his moment of insight that would come during his nap, and then drop his ball right on his foot so that he would wake up from his nap at exactly that moment. Really interesting. So I guess the question is, what is the science of what's going on inside our brains when we rest? Like, how come that's when moments of inspiration and insights hit us?
That's a great question. And the answer is one that neuroscientists started unpacking maybe in the 1990s or so, when they realized that the resting brain, right, when you put people in an fMRI machine and don't tell them to do a task, but just to kind of relax and let their minds wander, their brains actually didn't get quiet. They didn't get less active. It's just that the kind of patterns connecting the different parts of their brains shifted. And what they discovered was that when you allow yourself to think about nothing at all, or your brain activates what they now call a default mode network, which is a set of connections that literally can activate in the time it takes to blink your eyes. And this is a network that brings together parts of the brain that tend to be associated with creative thinking, with sort of visual thinking, and rumination about the past. Now, it also appears that the default mode network is implicated in those moments when we come up with novel solutions to problems, or we come up with an answer to questions that we've been trying to solve, but we haven't been able to consciously. So we have small everyday examples of this all the time, right? You're trying to remember who is the name of the actor who is in that band and in the movie and that other thing, and you can't remember. And then 5 minutes later, you're doing something else. The name pops into your mind. Oh, it was Harry Styles. That is the default mode network working on that problem, even while you are, folding laundry or doing something else. And what really creative people often do is discover that this is not a process that you can exactly control, but it is something that you can encourage and you can foster. And you do that by layering periods of really deep, focused, intensive work for several hours, with periods of deliberate rest. And what that allows is you both get some conscious work done on at the keyboard or the blackboard or whatever, but you often have some outstanding question, some unsolved problem that that you still have to figure out. You get up, you do something else, and that gives your creative subconscious time to continue working on that unsolved problem even while you're focused on something else. And often, if your creative mind will make progress on this and sometimes come up with the answer. And so even while these people, while highly creative people are sort of using rest for restorative purposes, because of the timing, it also has this kind of creative boost or kind of productive boost as well. And I think this is something that we are seeing not just in, like people who we would regard as super geniuses, but when I talk to people who run restaurants or do other kinds of creative work, or work that involves a lot of problem solving, like mechanics and nurses, they talk about having somewhat seeing the same kinds of benefits from their downtime when they move to shorter work weeks. So this turns out not just to be something that that people in the creative industries can benefit from. It turns out to be something that all of us can access, and all of us can benefit from, no matter, who we are and no matter what we do.
And what about inspiration, hitting you in a moment of, well, frankly, complete impractical irritation, which is the shower? Is that the same thing? Is that the default mode network as well? Because every time
It's
it happens to me, I'm like, oh, I want a pen on my phone to write this down. But
No, it is. Yes, that's the default mode network, sort of operating at a time when your mind is a little more relaxed. You're also generally physically a little bit more relaxed.
yeah, so one of the most, I think it's helpful to share, one of the most practical insights I got after reading Rest, and it's interesting because I do read a lot of this kind of stuff. I'm very into both self-help and also science. I'd say this is more science and storytelling than it is self-help, but it's, I guess, crossover as there is often with these books. It was the first time that I heard the impact of napping in a way that made me just suddenly start napping all the time. Not multiple times throughout a day, don't worry, but multiple times throughout the week, which is interesting because, I read Why We Sleep, which I'm sure most people that have come across your book might have read. But there was just a way that you told the story, and I certainly don't think it's because I aspire to be Winston Churchill at all, but there was just a way you told the story that really struck a chord, and as such, I've become a much more frequent napper, and it makes a big difference, the 20, 30-minute nap and feeling, like there's a second day ahead of me almost. So how would you synthesize the impact of napping and why we should do it more for listeners?
Sure. So, naps are not just something that you should do, on a little yoga mat at preschool. It's only actually fairly recently that naps fell out of favor among adults. In companies in Asia, for example, it's really in the last 15 or 20 years that the afternoon nap ceased to be an institution that pretty much everybody participated in. But the benefits are, first off, that our energy levels rise and fall naturally during the day. We tend to have more energy, higher capacity for attention, maybe a little more willpower in the morning, and then that kind of goes down. It picks back up in the late afternoon and early evening. But there's definitely this trough, kind of right after lunch, where we are pretty low energy. Anybody who's had to sit in on an early afternoon meeting recognizes this immediately. And so having a nap rather than trying to just power through has the benefit of charging your alertness somewhat more effectively than another cup of coffee at that time. There is also some interesting evidence that you can play around with the timing of your nap in order to get a little bit more of a creative boost versus a little bit more physical restoration. Most of us who nap, however, just nap when we're tired. And, we nap when we feel like we need it. And I think that is entirely a good thing, not only for the immediate benefits, but for also teaching us that even for creative workers, listening to your body is a good thing and will help you be more productive in the short run and help you have a more sustainable career in the long run.
Great, thank you. And Alex, I guess to summarize for listeners, what would you say are your top 3 recommendations for anyone that's looking to hit peak performance in their lives by obviously understanding the importance of rest?
Okay, so, I think the first thing is to take rest seriously enough to make time for it in your day. We assume that rest is something that we'll take when we have time, but the world does not give you time, right? You have to carve it out of your day in order to recapture it. I think the second thing is to recognize that work and rest are not competitors in a good life, but rather are partners. That each one supports and sustains the other, and that the challenge we all have is not to design lives in which we are constantly toiling, but rather to design lives in which we have space for both. The third thing I would say is that, especially for super ambitious people who are passionate about their work, who can really get wrapped up in it, that the best kind of rest is actually not just purely passive, but rather involves like a serious hobby that is as engaging as your work and offers some of the satisfactions without the downsides. And people who can find that those things are not only terrifically satisfying creatively, but they also help keep them in touch with the things that are best about their work, the things that they love most about it, which I think can build a degree of of resilience that, especially in difficult work times, and who doesn't have that right now, can be really valuable. So those are the three things I would recommend.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. It's been a pleasure to get you on the podcast.
Oh, thank you.